Literary criticism is not just the study, it is an evaluation and interpretation of literature by the different mindset in English literature. So hello everybody, welcome to today's session on literary criticism. In this class, we will explore how critics across ages have shaped our understanding on literature. So in this video, we will begin with classical criticism, which was the foundation upon which later literary theories are built. So we will start with the classical criticism, and this is very, very important. Before this, we have done two classes on literary criticism. The first, what is literary criticism, and the second one is in which we have discussed about the schools of literary criticism. Schools in the sense the different lenses by which critic analyze or interpret a work. Okay, so in this video we will start with the classical criticism. You know, now literary criticism is not just the study evaluation, but it is an interpretation of literature and society. Why it's compulsory, it is mandatory to study literary criticism? Because it helps us understand literature beyond the story, beyond the just a story. That means literature is not about only reading the novel, drama, or a story, but how the story has been written, by which perspective, and how the critics have analyzed those on the perspective of the society. We will study everything in literary criticism. Okay, literary in the sense literature, the work, novel, drama, poem, story, and criticism, whether it's a bad or a good way, how different perspective, different mindset share their thoughts, opinions about the writer, about the work. That is what the literary criticism means. Okay, so let's start. This is going to be the third class. In the last class, we will finish everything, because literary criticism, the way we have studied in a sequence, systematic manner, the poetry class and the fiction and short stories. Literary criticism, there are few only. We do not have to go by the ages, but in all the ages you will find one or two critics who have criticized, okay, who have shared their thoughts and opinions. So let's start the class. But before starting the class, there is a good news for everybody. And what is that? You can join the channel by taking the membership for extra study material, extra support, and extra guidance by me. And the membership content will be also there, so you can join. Everybody, do subscribe the channel, share to more and more students, share and care. And let's start the class. Thank you so much for joining. So you know, literary criticism, in literary criticism, the classical criticism is the foundation of the upcoming literary criticism. That is why literary criticism is very, very important to study before starting any other ages of literary criticism. Okay, so the most prominent critics of the classical age were the Greek philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, and followed by the Roman literary figures Horace, Longinus, and also we have Socrates. We will discuss. Okay, Socrates was not actually a formal critic, but because of his some point of view, his opinions, we can study a little bit about him as a literary critic. Okay, so their works set the foundation. The literary critic, in the literary criticism, classical critics writers have set the foundation for Western literary theory by establishing concepts that is still used today. You know, Aristotle's catharsis term is still popular and used today in modern films and plays. So this is very, very important to study the classical age or classical criticism. We simply cannot miss classical criticism. Okay, so let's start. Here classical critics including we have Plato, the famous work Republic, which is very important that we must not miss. We have to study. Aristotle in Poetics, Horace, Ars Poetica, Longinus on the Sublime, And Socrates, here I have mentioned he was not a philosopher, he was a philosopher, but not a formal critic. So we can still, because of his opinion and his point of view, his analyzation about the literature, we can study little bit about him because there is a question in the exam. So let's discuss little bit about him, Socrates first. Then we will move on. So Socrates, he was the philosopher of ancient Greece and the student of Plato. Okay, he was actually not a literary critic in the formal sense, we can say, but his ideas influenced later literary critics or literary criticism concept or term. That is why we study him as a part of literary criticism, especially regarding the moral and educational purpose of literature. He shared his views a little bit about criticism, moral education, what is the purpose of literature in for the writers and for the readers. So that is why we study Socrates. So primary sources that we find about Socrates, most of what we know comes from Plato's dialogues about Socrates. If we know that what were his views, we find from the Plato's dialogues, that is in from the work Republic, Ion or Gorgias. So what were the views on literature of Socrates here? Socrates believed poetry and drama should promote virtue. Art must guide citizens toward truth and moral goodness. And also, he criticized works that stirred irrational emotions or promoted immoral behavior. The way Plato said that the poets should be banished from the world because they spread immorality in the society, that should not happen. So, we can find in a little bit what he is criticizing about the work, that irrational emotions should not be promoted. Immoral behavior should not be promoted by the writers if they are writing. He strongly believed that poetry and drama should promote virtue in the society through the work of literature. So this was the view of Socrates. Okay. Now also he criticizes Homer as a and poets. So in Republic, Socrates questions the value of Homeric epics and what are the problems that he has find in the work here. Remember everything portrays gods and heroes. He said that the work has portrayed gods and heroes with immoral behaviors, lying, cheating, and revenge. Also, that could corrupt young minds by teaching them wrong values. He argued that literature should inspire rationality instead of irrationality, spreading irrationality in the society or in the viewers, the readers, self-control and ethical living. So this was the belief of Socrates. There are the, you can say, the opposite and the both the positive negative thought of Socrates made us study about him as a part of literary critic writer, little bit literary critic writer. Okay, I hope this point is clear to you, everybody. He simply believed that poet, if you are writing the work of literature, should promote virtue, should promote moral behavior instead of spreading immorality in the society, irrationality. This is what you have to remember. Because the work is spreading lying, the work is based on cheating, taking revenge, spreading immorality. This is what he believed, and this was the problem that he find in the work of Homeric epics. So this is what you have to remember about Socrates as a little bit part of a treatise. Also, he imitation. What did he share? He shared that Socrates viewed poetry as imitation, but a twice removed imitation from the truth. And remember now, Plato said that thrice removed from the truth. So he was also the student of Plato, so we can understand the student is saying twice removed and the Plato said the thrice removed. Here, reality, truth, reason, and that is the poetic imitation. A poet should not imitate, a poet should not spread immorality, a poet should not write the work which is based on taking revenge, spreading any immoral behavior. Instead, there should be more virtue. The people should learn something. The people should learn good behavior, ethics, values. Therefore, poetry is inferior. What did he say? That the poetry is inferior to philosophical reasoning in revealing truth. Okay. He also later influenced Plato's later critical stance on art and literature. So this was the Socrates' idea that he has shared about literature. So, what was the purpose of literature according to Socrates? Socrates said that literary criticism revolves around the ethical and educational function of literature. So, according to whom, a literature should teach virtue, encourage rational reflection, and avoid misleading, morally corrupting portrayals. This is the summarization you can simply remember. Okay. So, in a simple way, we can say Socrates saw literature not just as entertainment but as a tool for moral and intellectual development. In a simple manner, we can say there are a lot of movies which is based on the some specific learning things. That the purpose of the writer, the purpose of the maker is that the student, the audience should learn something. The audience should learn something from the movie. This was the aim of the makers. Similarly, here Socrates is trying to say and trying to convey us that if you're writing a literature, now the literature should have something that uh, readers should learn something, and that learning should not be the bad, but the good, that make you a good human being by learning the literature. So this was the views of Socrates. Okay, not just entertainment. The reader should not read as part of the entertainment that they are feeling bored, they are feeling not interesting, they do not have something to do, so they are reading just for the fun, just for the entertainment, just for the passing the time. But no, it should be the tool for moral and intellectual development of the readers or viewers or the audience. So he was critical of works that promoted vice, irrationality of false notions of the divine. So I hope about the Socrates, everything is clear. The three things teach virtue. Literature should teach virtue, encourage rational reflections, and avoid misleading or morally corruption portrayals. This was the thought of Socrates. Okay. Now let's move on to the next classical critics. Next classical critics we have very very important, and that is none other than Plato. Plato is so extremely important for the exam perspective. Plato, Aristotle, Horace, Longinus, the classical critics, which we will now study. So Plato, he was the Greek philosopher and the student of Socrates and teacher of Aristotle. Plato was the so classical. Plato was the classical Greek philosopher. He was the student of Socrates, disciple, and teacher of Aristotle. Here, he was the teacher of Plato and he was the teacher of students. So, Plato was the student of Socrates. And who was the student of Aristotle? So, the works that is written in dialogue form, Socrates is usually the main speaker because he has learned from his teacher, that is Socrates. He influenced the influence that he has left on us, that he became the first systematic thinker to question the role of poetry and art in society. Again, the similar things we can say that what Socrates has mentioned about the poetry, about the literature. Similarly, Plato somehow has been influenced by the thought of Socrates. So Plato did not write a separate book on literary criticism. His views were spread across different works, and that works the majorly we known as a Republic, which is very, very important. Especially the book 2nd, 3rd, and 10 you must read in detail. This is the detailed class, everybody. So there should not be any problem of joining the channel, because throughout this channel you are getting a lot of detailed content. So if you are truly preparing for UGC NET JRF exam, you can subscribe the channel and join for the extra support. So discussion of poetry, poets and their moral impact, all these things you will find in this work. Then the second book, Ion, Dialogue on Inspiration and the Role of Poets, he has discussed in this. Apology, Indirect Criticism of Poets when Defending Socrates, and Phaedrus about rhetoric, love and inspirations. Everything is mentioned here. But the most important, we have to study the Republic. Okay. What were the idea of Plato's? Plato's critical ideas found in his philosophical dialogues. particularly the Republic, Ion, and Phaedrus. Plato's philosophy asserts that the physical world is an imperfect copy of higher spiritual realm of forms. Since art imitates the physical world, it is a copy of copy and thus twice removed from the reality. Removed from the reality. What did he say? Imitation. A poet imitate. A poet spread immorality. A poet imitate the physical world. So it is a copy of copy. Remember, and that is that copy which is twice removed from the reality. And the reality is not there. Is nothing left. The real thing somewhere vanished. So poets should vanish from the world. They copy. They imitate. And in response, what Aristotle has said, we will discuss later. What were the key ideas of the Plato? So he gave us the mimesis, that is the imitation. In the work Republic, book 10, you will find the term mimesis in the book 10. Idea, what did he say? Art is an imitation of an imitation. Here, a copy of copy and thus twice removed from the reality. That the world around us, imitation of those forms. The writer totally copied the physical world, and also he gave the example of a chair and a carpenter. Remember that how a carpenter makes a chair, and then a painter he also gave the example, and a painter who paints the chair. So this is how the reality twice removed. He also said that art, poetry, and painting, imitation of that imitation, and that's thus thrice removed from the truth. Here, twice removed from, once you copy of one physical world, then twice, and then again, the third time, the thrice, that actually whatever the real thing is existed is totally disappear, totally vanish. The quotations by him: all poetical imitations are ruinous to the understanding of the hearers. You will find this quotation in the Republic work, book 10. Also, he said that poet as irrational, inspired in the book Ion. Idea he gave that poets write not through knowledge but through divine inspiration or the madness. Through the madness. Literature is an imitation of reality of the physical world by the poet, according to Plato. So Plato here criticizes because poetry could stir emotions and mislead people from the truth. Mislead word you must remember. Mislead or spread. So that should not happen with the readers, according to Plato. Poets are like magnets attracting others but lacking rational and understanding. And the quotation he has given in Iron: the poet is a light and winged and holy thing and cannot compose until he becomes inspired. So I hope you are getting the point what Plato has said. Plato simply said that literature is an imitation of reality, okay? And he said that the poet mislead people from the truth. Also, he said that poets appeal to emotions rather than reason. And also, according to Plato, that the literature can corrupt moral judgment if unchecked. So here he said that the role of the artist should aim to educate and uplift society. It's very important. Uplift society. And this is what Socrates said now. Educate. Educate and uplift society rather than just entertain. Rather than just entertain. This is what Socrates said. So we can here say both we can compare the thoughts of Socrates and his disciple Plato, that both are somewhere sharing the similar thought on literature, that the purpose of literature should be to educate and uplift the society, should not mislead people from the truth. Poets should appeal to emotions rather than reason. Literature should not be an imitation of the reality and should not mislead people, should not spread immorality. Okay. So here, what are all these thinkings of these two critics is to say somehow we are analyzing and we are observing that they are concerned about the society or people. They are saying that people, if they are reading something or they are watching something, they should learn moral, good, they should become this wise, they should not they should not distract from the world, or the work, the literature should not distract the people, distract. Okay, so this is what he had said. The people, mind of the people should not be diverted. Here also he said that poetry as morally dangerous. In Republic, you will find in the book second and third, poetry presents gods and heroes with immoral behavior, misleading youth. It arouses emotions rather than reason, weakness the rational soul. Here the important quotations: we must forbid the poets to utter any evil fable about the gods. Everything you will find in this PDF. I have taken so much time to prepare this PDF because I wanted to make it exam ready at once. You will find the important quotations, we will find the important book that we must read in detail, we find the important concepts, terms, if they have given step by step. So everything you will find this PDF. Okay, now let's move on. Also he said that the expulsion of the poets, expulsion, the poet should be banished from the world, because they are the reason that people are not learning something through the work, through the literature, through the poem. So the poets should be banished from the ideal state because they corrupt truth and morality. Still, he also said that Plato leaves a small door open. If poetry can be shown to be useful and moral, it may be admitted. So the line you have to remember is this, that the poet should be banished. Okay. Also, he said that how he has attacked on poetry. He said poetry should be based on philosophical system. Plato famously criticized poetry for multiple reasons. And what are the reasons here? Let's discuss. That it lacks moral and intellectual values and is dangerous to the state and dangerous for the people. It lacks moral. It appeals to the baser emotions and appetites rather than to reason. It corrupts the moral character of citizens and encourages falsehood. He also shared his views on inspirations. Plato dismissed poetic inspiration as a form of divine madness rather than true knowledge or the reason. Here they are basically discussing and saying that if the work is writing something, or people are reading something, they should learn, they should gain knowledge, they should learn something good, they should not distract, they should not mislead by the work that it is said that that the movie spread or movie spread immorality in society. Now these days it's very common, and there are many people, you all agree, many people who keep targeting the movies that this movie has this type of content which is not good for the society, which harms the people's thinking. They are about to lead the mislead the people, so they demand demand the government to the people, the movie should be banned. And many of the movies is actually banned because of the protest of the people. So according to Socrates and Plato, this is what they have discussed about the literature. And I think they were alive, they were still here in this era, 21st century. They have opposed all the movies, right? What do you think? Now, after Plato, let's discuss about the Aristotle. Aristotle, who was the student of a Plato. Student of Plato. Remember, there is a chain. Student of Socrates, Plato. Student of Plato, Aristotle. Everybody. Okay. And the student of Aristotle is Alexander the Great. And the teacher of Plato was Socrates. So this is a chain you have to remember. Teacher, teacher, and teacher. Student, student, and student. Okay, it become messy. So Aristotle was also a Greek philosopher, scientist, polymath who was born in Stagira, Macedonia. He was the student of Plato and later he tutored Alexander the Great. He was regarded as one of the most influential thinkers in Western philosophy. In many of the subjects now we study about the Aristotle. Arastu in Hindi, you know. Unlike Plato, who emphasized ideal forms, Aristotle focused on observation, logic, and empirical study. And what was that? What was the response of Aristotle in Plato's Republic? We will see here. But before that, let's see more about. He founded the Lyceum in Athens, where he taught and wrote extensively on subjects ranging from logic, metaphysics, ethics, politics, rhetoric, poetics, biology, and physics. You know, there is a difference between intelligent people, intelligence, and intellectual. So do comment who is the intelligent people and who is the intellectual people and what are the difference. His works, especially the Poetics, laid the foundation for literary criticism, introducing the concepts like we have mimesis, catharsis, and the structure of strategy, and many more. We will see later many more concepts. Aristotle's idea not just shaped philosophy but science and literary theory for centuries, earning him the title of the father of Western philosophy. Very, very important. You must know the lifespan of the Aristotle. We have classical Greek philosophy. He was the student of Plato, teacher of Alexander the Great. It is the summary. Philosopher, scientist, logician, and the theorist. He influenced, what was the influence of Aristotle? That he countered Plato's moral attack on poetry and poet, and he laid the foundation of systematic literary criticism in English literature. And the later, many of the concepts we still study of Aristotle. The major works of Aristotle you must not miss: Poetics, in which you will find the theory of tragedy, mimesis, catharsis, and plot structure; Nicomachean ethics, virtue ethics, the golden mean, pursuit of eudaimonia, happiness and flourishing, which means politics, state, citizenship, best forms of government; metaphysics, being, substance, causality, theory of unmoved mover; rhetoric, modes of persuasion, ethos, pathos, and logos; organon, that is the collection of works on logic; categories, prior analytics, posterior analytics, topics on interpretation. So, of all these works, which are the major works that we have to study being a literature, as part of literature is poetics and rhetoric. Very, very important, these two works. But for your knowledge, I have added here, in case if any of the concept they will ask, you can still remember. What are the major concepts by Aristotle? So the concept I have divided: literary concept that he has given, mimesis, imitation of life in art; catharsis, emotional purification that we use, fear and pity; hamartia, tragic flow or error in judgment. These are the PYQs, everybody. You can take a screenshot. Peripeteia, or you can join the Telegram channel for the PDF. Peripeteia, reversal of fortune. These are the PYQs. Anagnorisis, recognition or discovery that truth reveals. Unity of action, a play should have one main plot. Unity of time and place, later he emphasized by critics but rooted in Aristotle's idea of coherence. Also, six parts of tragedy that he has given, elements actually, six elements of tragedy, very, very important: plot, character, thought, diction, song, and spectacle. Five is very important, and this is the least one. Types of plot he gave us: so simple versus complex, involving peripeteia or anagnorisis. Okay, so these are the important literary concepts that we must not forget if we are preparing for NET or JRF, okay? And everything, they have appeared in the previous year exam. Whether it's in matching, chronology, or memory-based question. Then, main concept based on philosophical and ethical concepts: golden mean, eudaimonia, virtue ethics, four causes, and unmoved mover. Then logical concept, he has given us a syllogism, very important, induction and categories. Okay, and then rhetorical concept, we must not forget rhetorical concept by Aristotle. He gave us a ethos, pathos, logos. Ethos appeal to character, credibility appeal to emotion, and appeal to logic or reason. Okay, now let's discuss the poetic in detail. So about the poetic, what we have to remember that the first thing, it was the response of Republic, which was by Plato. So Republic versus Poetic. It was the response of Aristotle. What Plato has said, Aristotle discarded his opinion. Plato said that the poet should be banished because they spread immorality and they copy the physical world, which twice removed from the thrice removed from the reality. And he gave the example of chair, he gave the example of painter. This is the thing, important thing you have to remember about the Republic of Plato. And what poetic, according to Aristotle, what did he say? He said that imitation, he also said that about imitation, that it is not a bad thing. Instead, imitation is part of human behavior. Imitation is the part of human nature because by imitating we learn everything. So we cannot discard imitation and we cannot say that the poet imitates and spread immorality or immoral behavior in the human. As he gave the example that a child learns by imitating what the children's parents does. A child imitate his parent, a teacher imitate his, a student imitate his teacher. So there is nothing like that, but instead it is a part of human beings that imitation is a natural and way of learning for the human. Since many times, not by birth we learn everything, but by the time we learn by imitating, so we cannot say that imitation is a bad thing. Okay. Unlike Plato, Aristotle defends imitation. He said that humans are imitative beings. They will imitate because they will have to learn how they will grow by imitating. No? So there is nothing wrong in imitation if the human is imitating. It is a way of learning. It is a way of the action of a human that they are imitating. So now you got it now that poetic was the response of the republics by Plato, and what Plato has said, Aristotle defended poetry. Aristotle defended poetry by saying that imitation is a not a bad thing, but it is a nature of human. It is a behavior of human. You will find this. Why? Because we learn by imitating. A child learn by imitating their parents, or student learn by imitating the teacher, and this is how everything keeps going. So there is nothing wrong in imitating. This is what Aristotle said in his work Poetics. Here quotation he gave us that poetry is the imitation of an action and the poet imitates by it is the means of language. You will find in the chapter 6, you can study. Definition of tragedy he gave, which was extremely important, that tragedy is an imitation of an action and that is a serious. Tragedy must be serious in tone according to Aristotle and of a certain magnitude in the form of action, not narrative, through the pity and fear, effecting the proper purgation, that is catharsis. Catharsis, the pity and fear, in a sense that whatever we release, whatever the emotion we hold in ourselves, we while watching the characters, their emotions, we feel, we release, we cry, we feel sad, we feel nostalgia. So this is how we release our purgation. We clean our emotions through the emotions of the characters. So this is what the catharsis concept means. The core elements he gave about tragedy: serious, should be complete, should be magnitude, the language is appropriate, action, and at the end, audience feel urged. Okay. And the most important thing that you must not forget is the 6 elements of tragedies, everybody. It's a PYQs. And the first one, plot, which according to Aristotle is the soul of the tragedy. Soul of the tragedy. You know, my notes is everything is mentioned step by step. So that is why there is no need to explain more. It is the soul of tragedy. It's very important. Most important forms of elements of tragedy by Aristotle is the plot, which is mythos, and that is the soul of tragedy. The remaining 5 we have here: character, ethos, must support the action; thought, dianoia, ideas, arguments and themes; diction, lexis, style, choice of words; melody, melos, music and rhythm; spectacle, which is least important but still this is the 6 elements of tragedy; opsis, visual effect, and least important this is. So what does all these 6 elements of tragedy mean? These are the, if you are writing a tragic work, this should be the appropriate step that a tragic work should follow. There should be the plot. The plot is the soul of tragedy, any tragic work. There should be the character that support whatever the action has been mentioned. Then there should be the thought. What are the ideas? What should be the argument? What should be the theme that is work and tragedy is based on? Diction. What are the dialogues? What are the choice of words that should relate the characters, the plot of the action, so that diction should be the appropriate. Then there should be the melody, the background music, you know, in the movie that keep ringing, keep buzzing, word rhythms. And spectacles, the visual effects, like, you know, the objective correlative term you all know of T.S. Eliot. So the visual effect is also supportive for the tragedy. So these are the 6 elements of tragedy that a writer must follow or must have. Then here, catharsis term you will find in Poetics chapter 6. So in tragedy, that pity and fear arouses. Pity is elos and fear is phobes. Purges these emotions, leading to a psychological relief and moral balance. And also still today we debate that whether catharsis is emotional, moral or medical, because in the medical sense now catharsis term is also used. I have the notes. I will share the notes on catharsis separately. Okay. Then unity of action, he also said that tragedy should have one main action with a clear beginning, middle and end. This is very, very important, everybody. It's of PYQ questions, that a unity of action follow the 3 things, and that is main action. What the first thing, there should be the beginning in the work, then there should be the middle and the end. If any of these things lack, that the unity of action is not good, not appropriate according to Aristotle. So in the work, there should be the beginning is clear, the middle is defined, and the end is happening. Later, the critic extended this into the 3 unities, that is TPA, time, place, action. Okay. Though Aristotle clearly emphasized only unity of actions, and then he gave the types of plot. plot. He gave the types of plot, and we have a simple plot and complex plot. You will find this in chapter 10 and 11. So simple plot, according to Aristotle, that changes of fortune without reversal or recognition, and complex plot refers to that includes peripeteia, that means reversal of fortune, and anagnorisis, recognition or discovery. And if we remove all this, that will become the simple plot, and if we will add this peripeteia, reversal or recognition, anagnorisis, that will become the complex plot. Okay, that actually best tragedy combines both. According to Aristotle, best, if there the work you are going to define as the best tragic work, that means the work should based on simple plot and the complex plot, both should be there. Then the another important term is hamartia. What is this? Hamartia is a simply tragic flaw. In Poetics chapter 13, you will find hamartia is a tragic flaw of a protagonist. Protagonist. It's very important. Protagonist. The tragic hero should be neither completely virtuous nor utterly villainous, a man of high status who falls into misfortune due to hamartia or the error of a judgment. Example, you can have Oedipus, Sophocles, Oedipus Rex. You know how Oedipus by mistakenly he married his mother, and he find out what did he done to himself. He killed himself. He choked a knife in his eyes. And also the best example we can take Hamlet. Best example of hamartia we can take Hamlet. How Hamlet is a hamartia, the tragic flaw. You know what the situation that Claudius, who his uncle killed his father by poisoning in his ear, and later, not after many times, but his mother, Hamlet's mother, married to Claudius. And whatever situation created that throughout the play, Hamlet keep thinking that to be or not to be, that is the question, whether he should take revenge or whether should he not. So that is actually in the wrong judgment. He could not take the proper revenge as he should have taken, as per the critics. So whatever he was doing, he was thinking, he was keep thinking. The soliloquy is very famous, the to be or not to be, you can remember. Throughout the play, he keep thinking. He thought that what should he done, whether he should take revenge, whether he should kill his uncle Claudius. Then at the end, he became mad, and Hamlet. The critics said that he overthink, and due to his overthinking, he could not lead a judgment, reach on a proper judgment that what he should do, whether he should kill Claudius at once or whether should he leave. When Ghost informed him that his father has been killed by his uncle Claudius, instead of taking revenge instantly, he kept thinking throughout the play that what he should do. He did not take direct action. That is what it means. And because of all this overthinking, his indecisiveness, his tendency, his internal moral and existential conflict, he leads, and you can say all these things now ultimately leads to the downfall of the character Hamlet. Downfall of the character. So downfall here, or tragic flaw, is hamartia. Okay, I hope this thing is clear to you. Now, if we compare to Plato and Aristotle, what are the thoughts of both in terms of imitation? So Plato said that poetry as harmful illusion, Aristotle said poetry as a serious, valuable, and truth-bearing art. Okay. Now let's discuss about the Horace, which is also one of the important literary critic writer in the classical age. So his full name was Quintus Horatius Flaccus, commonly known as Horace. Okay. He was from Roman Augustan age, time of Emperor Augustus, and he was majorly known as the Roman Aristotle. Roman Aristotle in terms of literary theory, but more practical than philosophical. Aristotle was philosopher, no? He was philosophical in the sense, but here Horace, but here Horace is a more practical. Major works by Horace that you must not forget to read is Ars Poetica. Ars Poetica, the art of poetry. It is written as a verse epistle to the Piso family, the father and his two sons. Okay. It is not a systematic theory like Aristotle's Poetic, but a practical advice to poets. So in this work, Ars Poetica, you will find the advice of Horace that he has given to the poets. Okay. He gave that what should be the aim of poetry. According to Horace, in his work Ars Poetica, what should be the aim of poetry? So poetry must be both dulce and utile, that means sweet and useful. The poetry must be sweet and useful. That is, poetry should delight, entertain, and instruct. So, poetry should delight, that means entertain and instruct. These are also the PYQs. These ask you what is the meaning of dulce at utile or what should be the delight and instruct according to Horace. And in which work he has mentioned Ars Poetica, remember. Horace emphasized that poetry should not only instruct but also delight the reader. Okay, this was the aim of the poetry according to Horace. Unity and consistency. A poetry should have unity and consistency. That means it advocates unity of theme and internal consistency in plot, characters, and style. Okay, characters must remain true to their nature and there should no sudden contradictions. Example, you can understand a young man should act like a young man, not like an old philosopher. This is what the character nature means according to Horace. Decorum we talk about, it is very important. Decorum in the sense according to Horace, it is a style, language and subject that should be suitable to the characters and his age and what are the situation. Okay. In very easy language, I have mentioned everything in this PDF, everybody. There should not be any difficulty to understand this. We also talked about the imitation and tradition. So writers should study Greek models like Homer, Sophocles, etc., but not blindly copy them. They must adapt with originality. He said that you can take the reference, but you cannot copy them completely, but you must follow your original work. Your originality should be reflected. Also, what should be the role of a poet? The role of a poet, according to Horace, that a poet must have a natural talent. That means the poet should have genius, the poet should be imaginative, and also a poet should be artistic, disciplined, that they should follow the rules, revision, hard work. He gave the example of a craftsmanship in writing. It's very important. He advocates for patience and revision. He takes 10 years to perfect your work if needed. A good poem should be polished before publication. So, all in all, by reading Horace, we can understand that he is talking about not just any random pick of work or any style or any diction, but everything should be perfect. Everything should be perfect according to Horace. If you are copying, there should be originality. That copy should not be reflected in the work. Craftsmanship in writing, if you are mentioning that should be polished before publication. What are the satire and moral role? So poetry should correct vices by gentle laughter and moral instructions. So, classical criticism, one thing you will find that since Socrates and till we have reached Horace, one thing they have talked about is morality. Morality. That a poet should be moral in their work and readers should learn the moral behavior, the virtue. So this is the very common word you must remember. So if we compare Plato and Horace, if we compare all the three critics, so Plato, he said that poetry is harmful illusion. Aristotle defended and said that poetry is an imitation of action and valuable. And Horace said the poetry is useful, delightful, practical guide to living and writing. So all the important things you must highlight and must remember that Horace was a Roman poet and wrote Ars Poetica, and in which he mentioned and says emphasized instruct and delight. He talked about the decorum, which is appropriateness in literature. Then now let's discuss about the Longinus. Sometimes he called pseudo Longinus. He wrote on the sublime. And also one thing that you remember everybody that he was possibly a Greek rhetorician. So Longinus, you must remember everybody, his work is very important. The On the Sublime, in which he was actually the first critic to focus on aesthetic experience. Aesthetic experience that we study Walter Pater now, but it is in classical age. It is they have started talking about so aesthetic experience, how literature elevates and transports the audience. Okay, and the work on the sublime, very important, you must remember. The major works you can hear on the sublime, Peripeteia. It survives in fragmentary form, written as a letter, that is in epistolary style, to a Roman nobleman. And in this work, he focuses on the nature of the sublime in literature, that the quality which produces awe, grandeur, and elevation. He simply said that he focused on emotional impact and grandeur in literature. Emotional impact and grandeur in the literature in the work on the sublime, Longinus. Okay, he defined sublime as that which elevates the soul, producing transport, ecstasy, or it elevates the soul. It elevates the soul. The sublime, you can find wherever it occurs, consists in a certain loftiness and excellence of language which takes the reader out of himself. Out of himself. In the chapter 1, this quotation you can find. According to him, in the sources of sublime, you can find chapter 8 to 15. Longinus lists 5 principles of sources in the works sublime. The 5 principles of source, which is important: grandeur of thought, that means lofty ideas; strong and inspired emotion, that is passion and sincerity; noble diction, that means how you chose the word; then dignified word arrangement, that means composition, harmony, and rhythm; and figure of speech, including metaphor, hyperbaton, rhetorical devices that we use in our work. Okay, these are the 5 principles of a sublime according to Longinus. He talked about the role of passion, sublime versus beautiful, imitation and learning, and morality and sublime. Here are the examples you can understand here. Homer, grandeur in epic; Plato, elevated thought; Sappho, sublime passion in lyric poetry; and Demosthenes, sublime oratory. He simply said that the sublimity role of passion, he simply said that sublimity requires genuine passion. Artificial passion fails to elevate. Sublime versus beautiful, he said, sublime is not mere beauty, sweetness, or ornament, but it is about loftiness and intensity that overwhelms the audience. And imitation and learning, he said that great writers achieve sublimity by studying earlier masters like we have Homer and Demosthenes and Plato. And also, he said that imitation plus genius is equal to path to sublimity. That imitation, if you're imitating and you have genius mind, that means you are on the right path of the sublimity. Also, morality and in sublime, he thinks that he links sublimity with moral excellence, and he said corrupt times produce weak literature. Okay. What are the contributions of Longinus? So here he shifted criticism from rules to emotional impact. He talked about emotional impact and grandeur. Okay. Then first aesthetic critic who focus on readers' experience. He anticipated romantic theory like Wordsworth, Coleridge, and literature as powerful emotion. The one thing that we study in romantic age, that the writer focuses on the individual emotion, individuality. Now here the medieval criticism, everybody. In English literature, we have a very few ages that literary critics actually exist. And the first, we very important, we have a classical criticism. After that, we enter into the Renaissance age. Then we enter into the modern and postmodern age, that is 20th century, and then later on. But medieval age, somehow there is a little bit minor and major writers were included because of their minor criticism in that they have mentioned in the work. So in the Middle Ages now, you won't find any particular critics, but here literary criticism was not a formalized discipline as it is today. In the Middle Ages, we are particularly talking about, but was practiced primarily through the commentary and theological and classical text. The writer were not majorly criticizing any work or any poet or any writer, but instead they were writing their own work and they were using the method of critics, the method of criticism. So that thing was highlighted. So here medieval writers adapted classical rhetoricals and grammatical approaches to interpret scripture and other important works. They were often focusing on allegory and moral instructions. These two things that actually in the critical sense we were existing in the medieval age. Okay. There were you will find the religious scholars who were heavily influenced by the Christian theology and biblical interpretations. And the writer we have Saint Augustine. He was actually, we can medieval age, we can study about him. So Saint Augustine we have, who was actually known as Saint Augustine of Hippo. He was early medieval and Christian Latin church father. He was the philosopher, theologian, and bishop of Hippo. That is why he was known as the Saint Augustine of Hippo. He was actually the bridge between classical philosophy and Christian doctrine. Augustine applied Neoplatonic ideas to his aesthetic and interpretive theory. He stressed the importance of literary works unity and also taught the four-level method of biblical interpretation. Unity, Neoplatonic, four-level method, Saint Augustine, you remember. He merged classical rhetoric like Cicero and Plato with Christian theology and laid foundation for Christian literary criticism. So Christian literary criticism majorly you can remember Saint Augustine. Okay. The major works he gave us on criticism was Confessions, It was an autobiographical in which he discusses the role of language, beauty, and the divine truth. Okay. Another we have De Doctrina Christina. In his work, it was a biblical interpretation and rhetoric and key ideas on specifically criticism he gave us was purpose of literature, that what should be the purpose of literature. So literature, especially the scripture, is a tool for guiding souls to God according to Christian Augustine. Beauty in language is secondary to truth and morality, and also how you interpret a text. According to St. Augustine, it advocates allegorical interpretation of scripture. Every text can have multiple levels of meaning, that we have literal, that is surface, allegorical, hidden and spiritual, moral, ethical teaching, and anagogical, mystical, divine truth. Okay, these are the multiple levels of meaning in the interpretation of text. While we are going to interpret a text, we must follow these things. Then rhetoric style, he mentioned language and rhetoric should serve the truth. Eloquence is valuable only if used for teaching and correcting, persuading towards Christian life. Then for the beauty and art, he said earthly beauty in poetry or art is good only if it leads to divine beauty. He is talking about more elegant. He is talking about the elegancy of the work. That there should not be only beauty, but the divine beauty, the attractiveness. Poetry that distracts from God is becomes dangerous, and poetry that uplifts towards gods that become valuable. So majorly he is focusing on Christian value and theme that he has mentioned. Okay. Now, another medieval writer, a critic that we must not forget to study, we have Boethus. This is the pronunciation. A Roman philosopher, statesman, and scholar. Roman philosopher. He was best known for the Consolation of Philosophy. Consolation of Philosophy is a work by him. He played a key role in transmitting classical philosophy, especially the Aristotle and Plato, to the medieval world. He bridged classical thought and medieval scholasticism. His works deeply influenced medieval literary and philosophical criticism. So, that is why he is important. You must not forget. The major critical works by him we have the Consolation of Philosophy, in which he discussed many things. And this work was written in Latin while Boethius was imprisoned. He combines prose and verse, that means the metrical section, to explore philosophical ideas. He addresses fortune, happiness, fate, and divine providence. He considered a critical treatise on the purpose of life and the moral role of literature. So here we also talking about the moral role of a literature in society or for the readers. Remember, this is the important work by Boethus, everybody. What he has talked about, the Institution Musica, that means on the organization of music. In the literature, treatise on the theory of music and harmony, and it links musical order with cosmic and moral order, reflecting the medieval belief in art's ethical and philosophical significance. He also commented on Aristotle by providing explanation of Aristotle's logic and poetics. He helped transmit classical literary theory to the medieval intellectual world. That is important. Okay. For the knowledge, you can study Boethus, everybody, and who writer that he has been influenced by Aristotle or Plato, whatever he has, you can at least remember that. His key ideas, let's see. Philosophy as literary guidance, that Goethe saw literature, especially poetry and allegory, as a tool to teach moral and philosophical truth. Fortune and fate in literature, that means that explored the work. The literature should explore human suffering and moral resilience, influencing allegorical writing in the Middle Ages. Majorly, he is focusing on the medieval age. He said that the literature reflects life uncertainties, guiding readers toward wisdom and virtue. He said that integration of classical thought, according to Boethus, it means the literature adapted Plato and Aristotle to medieval moral frameworks. So, according to him, poetry and philosophy are intertwined. So, according to Boethus, in Fortune and Fate in Literature, a literature reflects life's uncertainties, guiding readers toward wisdom and virtue. So, since classical age, we are studying about the literary critics of classical age. All the literary critics mention, if they have been criticizing the work, they are only talking about the moral behavior, that the moral lesson of the work that should a poet must teach to the reader. If the reader is reading, if the audience is reading or watching something, they must learn something good instead of distracting, feeling disturbance, feeling distraction. So Boethus is not different, but he has also mentioned the same thing. Why? One thing that you must know about Boethus, this is also the question you can find. He combined philosophy and literature that actually to explore fortune, fate, and morality. He influenced medieval allegorical writing and established literature as a vehicle for ethical and spiritual instruction. Who was the literary critic that actually combined philosophy and literature to explore fortune, fate, and morality? Is Boethus. Okay, this is how you can create the question. Now there are literary critics who are not as popular as we have seen Plato, Aristotle, Horace, but they have somehow share their thought. That is why the way we have a study about the Socrates. So here the Saint Thomas Aquinas, though he was primarily a philosopher and theologian, Aquinas' work on logic and the nature of scripture influenced how literature was categorized and interpreted. He considered poetry the lowest form of logic. Who considered the lowest form of logic, the poetry, is Saint Thomas Aquinas. According to him, it deals with the fictions rather than objective reality. Plato was saying that poet imitates the physical world, and Saint Thomas is saying that it is far from the reality. It is fiction. Then another critic you have to study, Venerable Bede. He was an early English scholar and historian. Bede wrote on grammar and meter. He edited classical rhetorical commonplaces with biblical examples, adapting classical learning for Christian studies. So that is why he is also important. In medieval age, the important literary critic that you must study is Dante. Dante Alighieri. He was one of the most significant critical voices. Italian, he was an Italian poet, a writer, and philosopher. One second. He was best known for his epic poem, The Divine Comedy, very popular. You have to study, everybody. In this work, he also incorporated complex layers of allegorical meaning. He was considered the father of the Italian language, and also his critical ideas are mainly found in the Vulgari Eloquentia. On the eloquence of vernacular, it means, and the second work, the second convivio, you have to study the banquet. Okay. So, one of the important significant critical voices, he was an Italian writer and philosopher best known for his work, The Divine Comedy. In this work, he has mentioned the complex layers of allegorical meaning. He was considered the father of Italian language, and his critical ideas you can find in the work De Vulgari Eloquentia, that means on the eloquence of vernacular. Okay. This is how you can make notes. I hope not you are just watching the videos, but altogether you are preparing your own notes. So always sit with a paper and a pen. Your register, your notebook should be with you while watching the videos. Now, what are the major critical works by Dante? The Vulgari Eloquentia, written in Latin, which is unfinished. The aim of this work is to defend the use of the vernacular, that means in Italian, in serious literature rather than only Latin. He argued that the vernacular could also reach the heights of literary expression, and this was the revolutionary for the medieval period. This idea that he has discussed in the Vulgari Eloquentia, which was written in Latin and also remained unfinished, it remains and it became a revolutionary in the medieval age. The idea of Dante that he has discussed in the work was revolutionary for the many critic writers, for the many critics. Then the second work, Convovio, that means the banquet, written in Italian. It defends his choice to write in the vernacular instead of Latin. He uses allegorical interpretation of poetry. That means the poem as vehicles of deeper philosophical truth should be. And the another most important work that you must not forget to study is the Divine Comedy. Divine Comedy always appear in PYQs or chronology, matching, and memory based question. So it is not only a literary masterpiece by Dante, but also a critical statement in practice. He combines theology, philosophy, and poetry, showing how poetry's power to elevate the human soul. That means how poetry empower to elevate human soul. His use of allegory became an influential model for later criticism. So that is why Divine Comedy is important. It is the masterpiece work of Dante. What were the key ideas by Dante? So he defends of vernacular literature. Dante argued that the vernacular is the natural language of mankind. In the book 1, chapter 1, the Vulgari Eloquentia. So, unlike Latin, which was artificial and limited to scholars, vernacular was universal. That means the language of mankind, the language of humankind, the language which everybody understand and everybody speak is the universal language. So, there should not be any limitation. There should not be any foundation according to Dante of the language. Purpose of poetry, he mentioned that poetry should not merely entertain, who said this thing again, but also instruct and guide humanity toward truth and salvation. Remember, all the classical and medieval ages poets, critics, are describing the humanity, the human's moral behavior, the virtue, the salvation, the truth, the moral guidance, the moral instructions instead of any false, any bad thing, any distraction, or any mislead or any error. That a poetry or any literature work should not have all these things. In this work, Convovio, he says poetry conveys moral and philosophical meaning beneath the literal sense. Okay, so it was the purpose of poetry according to Dante. The theory of allegory he has given us. He developed a fourfold method. Remember, very important, fourfold method of interpretation borrowed partly from the medieval biblical exegesis. The first literal, second allegorical, fourth third moral, and fourth anagogical. That means spiritual divine meaning. This gave poetry depth and divine authority. And if we will compare Dante to other critics writers, Plato, who distrusted poets and calling them imitations of shadows or banished from the world. Dante elevated poets as teachers of truth through allegory. Aristotle said saw poetry as imitation of catharsis, and Dante saw poetry as a spiritual ladder or divine journey. Okay. Then another important literary critic writer we have Boccaccio. It's very important, everybody, who was an Italian writer, poet, and Renaissance humanist, who was famous for the Decameron. Remember, in 1353, he was the student and admirer of Dante. He was carried forward his defense of poetry, and the importance as a critic of Boccaccio. You can understand him as the critic for his Latin work, Genealogia Decorum Gentilium. It's important. Genealogia Decorum. It's Deorum. Deorum Gentilium. He is important. This is the important by Boccaccio as a literary critic. That means genealogy of the pagan gods. The major works, critical works by him, the major critical works by him, Genealogia Deorum Gentilium, you have. It is a 15-book encyclopedia of classical mythology. It is a defense of poetry against the critics. In this work, he argues that poetry is a form of divine truth. Again, he is talking about the divine truth, hidden under fables. And he also stresses the educational and moral value of poetry again. So what is the common word and what is the common thing that you have to remember since classical till medieval age of literary criticism, that the literary critics were majorly talking about the moral behavior, morality throughout the work, through the literature. There should be the moral thing in the work that teaches you good value of life, good value how you behave in society, how you become as a human being. What are the key ideas by him? He said he as defense of poetry. He said argues that poetry is not falsehood but a hidden truth. Poetry is a valid truth. Its fables contain wisdom beneath the well of fiction. Okay, you will find this work in Genealogia book 15. Divine inspiration, he said, divine inspiration allegory in poetry. So he believed poets are inspired by God, similar to prophet. Poetry, therefore, has a sacred value. Now here he is talking about the more purity of the work, purity of the literature, and he has compared the poets to the god, that they have, the poet are inspired by God, so they behave like that. They should not spread any immorality in the society or in the reader of mind of the reader. Allegory in poetry he is talk about like Dante, Boccaccio emphasized allegorical interpretation. He talked about myth and fables, that they should be read symbolically, not literally. He defends against moral critics, and he said that some critics of his time said poets were immoral or useless. Who said this, immoral or useless? Plato. He was against the poet and their work. Notable point that you must remember about Boccaccio, he gave poetry divine legitimacy by calling poets inspired prophets and poetry of valid truth. His defenses strengthened Dante's legacy and set the foundation of Renaissance literary theory. Very, very important. Boccaccio defended poetry as a source of knowledge and truth in his genealogy of the pagan gods. He and other later medieval humanists challenged the scholastic view that relegated poetry to the lowest branch of logic. So that is why Boccaccio is important to study as the literary critic, because he is also somehow talking about the morality through the work, through the literature. Okay. So today in this class, we have talked about the literary criticism focus majorly we have focused on the classical critics. Okay, classical critics we have talked about in this video, in this lecture, from how I can forget that this thing has not happened yet again. Happened yet. Yeah, you all know. One or two times it's must. So from Plato, no, or from Socrates, till we just have finished Boccaccio. That means classical literature to medieval literature, medieval criticism. Classical criticism to medieval criticism, we have seen the many critics. We have discussed about Plato, how he has talked about the writers, the poet, that they should banish because they spread immorality in the society. They should teach moral lesson to the reader. Then we talked about Aristotle. Aristotle defended in his work Poetics, in response to the Republic, he said that imitation is not falsehood. Imitation is a part of human life. It is a human nature. It is a human behavior that human learns by imitating. Then we have talked about Longinus, talked about his work Sublimity, how he has focused. Then we talked about Horace. Then we enter into the medieval age and we talked about many other literary critics, Boccaccio, Saint Augustine, what they have said. Everybody since classical criticism till medieval age, all the literary critics writers major focus was on moral lesson. Eventually, what you learned from this video, this lecture, what did you learn? What did you get the point? All the critics talked about the moral lesson, truth, wisdom, that a literature should represent, instead of spreading any other falsehood and misleading the readers, misleading the society. They are only talking about the true truth, wisdom, everything. Okay. Then we have talked about poetics. We have seen catharsis, hamartia, mimesis. Then six elements of tragedy by Aristotle. Then simple and complex plot is the soul of tragedy. Everything we have discussed in this video. Everybody, if you want the PDF, you can comment. Now what I'm making here. Okay, so thank you so much for joining, everybody. Those subscribe the channel. You can join the membership also to get as closer to get a latest. You can join the membership also and do subscribe the channel, share to more and more students, and wait. The final class of literary criticism will happen just after this video. We will finish in one video the remaining class because classical criticism was important. Plato, remember to not what is remember to study about Plato's Republic. Okay, then Aristotle's Poetic. I have mentioned the chapter also, Poetics. Then Horace, Ars Poetica. Then Longinus, on the Sublime. These four writers, critic writers, you cannot simply miss, and the work. Now, do take care of yourself. Stay tuned with the channel. Subscribe the channel. Press the bell icon to get the latest informations. Bye.